I'm going to take Alex's lead. I wasn't going to talk about my kids, but my son was on the upper right-hand corner of the Lotame's family. He was a 2-year-old then, and he's an 8-year-old now. And he asked me, he was talking to me last week in a manner that I didn't expect was going to lead into identity. So he asks, why do we have names? Right? It's one of those questions that little kids ask, and it can be very silly and it can be very profound. So he asks, why do we have names? I said, well, when you're in a relatively small group of people, you're with 20 people, you want to have something to call folks that's unique. He says, oh, unique, that's interesting. Why don't we all have a name that nobody else has? And I said, well, when you go to meet people like in this environment, it would be really overwhelming if everybody had their own very unique name. That's really more like an ID, right? And we have those things. We have passport numbers, and we have social security numbers. But really, what we want to do with a name is get something that's familiar enough, but unique enough, right? So we hit on a couple of the concepts that we're going to talk about today, which are specificity of an ID, of a name, how accurate it is, namespaces and how namespaces interact with each other, and basically a web of IDs that our names and government IDs and other things are. So in case it's confusing, creating connections in a disconnected world, one of the things that's about is all of these IDs, and we live in a particular moment in third-party ad tech where it feels like it's a game that an 8-year-old designed and said, what if we all had the same name? Or what, that same conversation I had with my 8-year-old feels like what we're living through with some of the technical challenges and some of the hurdles that we're looking at. So with that, let's start. And the first thing I think we want to talk about is why we're talking about this at all. What is so important about creating connections? What is it about connection that's important from each of our perspectives? So Rob, if you want to start.
Oh yeah, I think what a time to be alive. I mean, we have so much access to so many things at our fingertips. We also have the ability to connect with people both in real life, although I feel like that's dwindling with the younger audience, and connecting with them through the digital world. At Viacom, as a marketer, when we think about connections, I mean, obviously there is the human connection that we obviously want to forge with each of our consumers, but how we do that from a tactics basis, it really comes down to kind of 3 different principles. I'd say the first one is intelligence. The ability to connect different identities and do identity resolution, so I can understand a consumer holistically from the individual, from the person, is much more powerful than just having device-level personas. And what I mean by that is I perform different actions on different devices. If I look at each of those devices in isolation, I only get a single piece of the puzzle of who Robert actually is. I think one of the other key areas also is on attribution. I need to be able to, especially in the direct-to-consumer space, which is our SVOD, AVOD supported streaming services, our live events, and our consumer products, I need to be able to tie all of my different ad exposures back to a single user and really understand what that return on ad spend is. What we see when we use cross-device technology in the live event space, we might see an increase in our ROAS of 20 to 40% when we enable that cross-device tracking. And so that allows us to have a better picture of how to optimize. And then I'd say the last area is really on targeting. There's different areas and different times that we want to reach the individual device, we want to reach the individual or the household. And what that comes down to is understanding your product and understanding when you need to move into kind of a moment strategy. And what I mean by that is with television, if I have a show on at 8 p.m., probably the biggest qualifier for me is that you're actually at home. That's my opportunity. If you're at home on the couch, that's a great opportunity for you to be able to actually watch my TV shows. TV consumption is a pretty low consideration product, so what we want to be able to do is have that ability to reach the primary device and any associated devices within a very narrow window, and we're able to do that through a lot of identity resolution and device graphs.
So, and if you think about, I think Andy mentioned you have Google, Facebook, and Amazon. There's a whole world that exists outside of those three platforms as well. If you think about the hundreds of thousands of publishers that exist in that world, and all the marketers that are using those publisher platforms to be able to reach those consumers. And in the world that we live in right now, I think the core problem of making sure that you're reaching the right consumer at the right time with the right message, and being able to measure that you're actually doing this well. This goes back to what Rob mentioned about attribution as well, that you're able to do that and do that well is so much more important. And if you tack on top of that everything that's going on with what Safari is doing and what Chrome's doing, as well as anything that's coming from the side of privacy, doing it in a privacy-safe way is just as important. So in the world that we live in, being able to solve identity as a quality solution and doing that in a privacy-safe way, I don't think there has been there's been a more interesting time than right now.
Yeah, I just want to add two pieces to this. The first one is that, if you'll allow me to sit in my Lotame hat, Lotame is an entity that we operate on behalf of our customers. We are a monetization engine for you, and every way that we monetize data, whether it's allowing you to retarget offsite, allowing you to find that data elsewhere, every way that we allow you to make money off of a page view requires connection. And without creating those connections, we just can't do what we're deputized to do on your behalf. So that's kind of the first piece of it, that as Lotame, we sit here and we say, as folks are attacking identity from a couple of perspectives, there's no way we can do what we need to do if we don't address this issue head on. The second thing I wanted to bring up is to take off that Lotame hat and just talk about, is this important? Because we're talking about, the what and the how of identity, and we're going to talk a lot more about that. But there's a piece of this which is why, and Andy alluded to it when he said Google, Facebook, and Amazon are eating a tremendous amount of the ad space. And for the New Yorkers in here, if anybody is in the 14th district, you saw your congresswoman nail Zuckerberg really hard yesterday. And there's a reason she did that, because we have one company that is controlling essentially all of social media, right? So just as a citizen, forgetting about my position at Lotame, I think it's a really critical thing that we have a vibrant third-party ad tech space that can monetize for other than the largest companies that we have. So with that as sort of like a framework of why we're talking about this, I wanted to ask Rob if there's anything beyond IDs. So we're going to talk a whole bunch about IDs. Are there any other aspects you'd like to touch on in terms of what disconnection looks like for you from an advertiser's perspective?
Yeah, sure. I can chime in with a couple thoughts. I think anybody in this room that's a marketer, we have to play in the sandbox of Google, and we have to play in the sandbox of Facebook and Amazon to a degree. It's a necessity. It's not a luxury. What comes with that, and I think what comes with not just those walled gardens, but walled gardens in general, is I'm giving a lot more. I'm giving my data. I'm giving my dollars. And in return, I don't necessarily get that same ID back with actual information. So that value exchange is a little off. but it's livable in my standpoint. I think where things get a little bit more murky is when I'm running a live event or a performance marketing campaign, and I can't tie back all of my media exposures to a single user. What I have to then do is I have to operate within Facebook and Instagram's construct and their methodology for conversion tracking and attribution. And then I have to operate within Google's construct and their silo. And then I have to work within Amazon, and it goes on and on. And so what that basically creates is, for my opinion, I'm not allowed now to bring my attribution model to the table. I'm not allowed to use the insights that I have and the methodology that I have from a content company and from my products. I need to rely on each of those different walled gardens to tell me how they're doing. And that just, I think, personally, I don't like when people grade their own homework. And I think we're kind of living in a system where we have to get a level of comfort for that, because that's the way that the garden has been constructed.
Cool. Thanks. So from there, I want to sort of ask Ajit to come in with, like, from your perspective, why can't things operate the way that they've always operated? There may be people in here who've been running ads for a long time, and what makes it so that we can't continue operating the way we've been?
So I think it goes back to a few different cases, right? Even if you look at kind of where we stand right now with the evolution of the amount of data that's available across all the devices, all the touch points that any marketer is reaching those consumers. And I think I've heard anywhere between like 8 or 9 devices at an individual level. If you think of it at a household level, that kind of mushrooms as well. And if you think about now, add on top of that what Rob was referring to in terms of all the walled gardens that exist that kind of have their ID spaces within their own walled garden and are not willing to share that outside, that number is going to look extremely big. And the amount of data, even if I look at kind of like what we see within our, like all the data sources that we get data from, the amount of data is just humongous. And where we kind of are living right now in the world where you continue to have that, having a privacy-safe solution which solves that problem around being able to take that message, understand, here are like, hey, this is Ajit who came into my website. This is the same guy that walked into my store. This is the same guy that also saw my ad 3 days back on his mobile device. Being able to do that, and being able to do that across all publishers, not just these walled gardens, so where you can then use your own analytics, you can use your own attribution models, and being able to do that is just extremely important. And if you think about like a lot of the DTC brands, having that understanding of that consumer is extremely important. As a marketer, nothing can get more important than knowing who your consumers are, being able to build lookalikes around them, being able to measure whether they're actually performing. If you think about all those problems that I just stated, having that identity solution and having one that kind of can operate across the board is critical. Yeah.
So from our perspective, as the DMP that sits on top of the core repositories of the data that you're trying to use, what that ends up looking like for us is we have, people have heard about the solutions like intelligent tracking prevention on Firefox, on Safari, where third-party cookies are blocked, first-party cookies are cleared by default within a day. And that starts to really impact the way data is shaped for us. So where we may have had fewer profiles and richer profiles in the past, especially when we're talking about cookie profiles, it really, instead of like a skinny a skinny in one direction and fat in the other direction matrix, it's starting to get larger in one dimension and shorter in the other dimension. So you get a wide variety of very small profiles. And if you try to operate on those in the way that you did in the past, all of your activities are just not going to work. So the solutions that Ajit and I are going to talk about in a bit are really required just in order to make the infrastructure here work in the way that you expected it to work in the past. So, outside of cookies, there's other dynamics going on. Mobile IDs are there, and they have not suffered from some of the dynamics that we've seen this year. They suffer from different dynamics surrounding fraud and other things that we deal with. But really, in terms of cookies, the changes that have happened in the past year necessitate that everybody really takes a look at this. All right, so we've talked a bit about cookies and mobile devices. What other channels do you think about, Rob, where you're looking for an identity solution that can stitch together some disparate pieces of data?
Yeah, I think I outlined a lot of the big ones that probably any marketer struggles to try to resolve across. For us as a content company, I think one of the things that we are encouraged by is that we are in prime mobile video consumption era. I think 4G and LTE has really ushered that in. Some of the issues with the cookie and the cookie crumbling, we don't necessarily feel that probably as much as some other partners, because as a content company, where we don't have our hooks directly with the consumers, we're in a constant partnership. And I think that that's at least one of the luxuries that we get as a content company. Anytime there's an emerging platform, usually either that emerging platform or that emerging ad unit, it's kind of restricted into whichever company brought that into fruition. And so we're lucky in the standpoint that usually if you bring in a new format, a new ad unit, a new device, one of the first things that consumers want is actual content to experience across that device. And so from our standpoint, the areas that we can't connect the dots with, partnership is the path of least resistance.
Yeah. So, Ajit, what does that look like for you guys in terms of new types of IDs coming in? How do you deal with those and address them such that your solution helps? Yeah.
So as I was preparing for this panel, I had my team kind of pull some numbers out just to get me a sense of everything that we see coming in. And this is something that I used to joke about previously, that all the work that the industry is doing around driverless cars is mostly so that people can actually sit back and watch more ads as they drive somewhere or don't drive somewhere. But funnily enough, we saw about 27,000 Teslas that showed up in all the data sources that we had. And if you think about across cookies, mobile devices, connected TVs, we see about 100 billion devices that show up. If I do a 60-day look back across the globe, this is we're talking maybe 100 to 200 billion devices. And as you get more and more of these devices as IP enabled, as were 5-6 years back where there were not as many TVs that were IP enabled, you have a lot more now. As you have more of these Internet of Things devices that are now IP enabled that actually can show an ad. If you have say a Samsung refrigerator with a screen, you're going to sort of start seeing those that you need to make sure that, hey, that same device that has that Samsung refrigerator also has these other devices in their home. So as you kind of bring in more devices that are addressable, that are actually that I start off as being IP enabled, we are going to see more and more of those come up. And I'm assuming hopefully the 27,000 Teslas are not seeing ads as they're making their way in, but again, like over time, we do see that the number of IDs and the devices are going to mushroom.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we as an industry need to do a good job of is being clear on standards for IDs. So I'm going to say a little bit of a story. So before I worked for Lotame, I started a mobile DMP, which got folded into Lotame. And so I've kind of seen mobile data from the beginning until where it is. And at the beginning of mobile, we used to use unique device identifiers on Apple and Android IDs on Google. And these were identifiers that were placed at the time of manufacturing of the device and were completely unclearable and hugely problematic from a privacy perspective. And so folks would try to manage this issue by hashing it and salting and hashing, and everybody was doing something different, and it was really quite a mess. So Google and Apple introduced IDFA and Google Ad ID, which really make the situation so much cleaner on mobile, and it does so for a few reasons. A, it's stable. It's clearable. You have an entity that has a relationship with the user, and they can manage the do not track on it. So there's a couple of key features there that I think there's a lesson out of how nicely things work on mobile, right? Like, we're not talking about the end of mobile ad IDs here. We're talking about cookie crumbling. And there's a really good reason for that. So it would be great to see in these new formats, whether we're talking about Teslas or Rokus, it would be awesome to see those properties of the mobile ad ID make it there. So I actually had a look at the Roku API, and I interestingly found, and they're obviously now making more money off of ads than they are off of devices. And the ID that you grab in their API, you get from the analytics API, not the ad API, right? So it's sort of weirdly placed to begin with, and it's using a hash of email. So again, not well thought through from that perspective. Roku bought DataZoo, if anybody didn't know. So the guys at DataZoo know this very well, and I'm sure they're going to improve the situation there. But it's sort of one of those things, as we see new ad formats and new ID types, to kind of keep those core things in mind. All right, so we've spent a ton of time setting up the problem, and I want to give Ajit the opportunity to talk about some of the technical pieces of the solution that Tapad brings to IDs that have all of this consumption content.
Right. So before I go into that, I wanted to also second your thing about standardization of IDs, right? I think not having standard IDs leads you into problems such as the one that we're seeing with cookies, where the whole concept of cookie syncing started with the fact that there are no standard IDs across the browser. It is at a domain level, it is at browser level. So the whole inefficiency that comes with having to sync cookies, and now you have ID consortiums that are trying to make sure that they solve that problem. All of that came with by starting off with the fact that there was not a standard ID. And to Omar's point, that doesn't exist in mobile devices. You have IDFAs, you have Android ad IDs, and those work universally across all apps within that particular device. And works clean, works efficiently, gives consumers all the choices around being able to opt out. And as we think about connected TV now, I would say we are in the ground floor of that opportunity. And again, talking about numbers, US has about 110 million households, and across all the data sources that Tapad has, we see 6 billion connected TVs. Clearly, something's off there. What we're seeing is you have synthetic IDs that are being created, IDs that are not standardized, each app kind of creating its own. It's done at a session level. Again, we are walking into the problem knowing that where this is going to end. And I think that to me is a good opportunity even for the industry to get together and maybe do something around standardization of IDs. Now, going to the other question around being able to solve the problem. It's for us, it starts with, we take a very different approach to the rest of the players in the market where we have what we call modeled, or what has been more popularized as a probabilistic way of building identity solutions. It starts with the longitudinal data that we have around devices and all the signals that we see around the devices. And using those signals that can be done at a cookie level, that can be done through mobile ad IDs, that we get through anybody from a small app developer to large SDKs that kind of aggregate the data and want to monetize that data. We take all that longitudinal data, identify patterns that say, these are, in our opinion, using our machine learning models that relies on also what we call a truth set or a label set, being able to identify what devices comprise a household, and within that household, how many individuals exist, and what are the devices that belong to each of these individuals. One of the things that Tapad prides itself on is not being able to relate it back to any kind of PII, so we don't actually take it back to a real household or a real individual that can say, hey, these 5 devices belong to Ajit or Rob. Same thing from a household perspective. The other thing that Tapad does not do is we're very much a privacy-first company. We take pride in the fact that all of this, the consumers have a choice. We respect the choice that consumers make, and in some cases we go above and beyond. For example, with opt-outs, we don't just stop at opting out at the device level, but we actually extend it across all the other devices we think belong to that individual as well. The other thing is we've stayed away from fingerprinting or any technologies where consumers don't typically have the choice around being able to opt out of that particular signal being used to create that ID. So again, that's the other thing that we've kind of stayed away from.
Cool. So that's there's a lot more to talk about there, but I'm going to just point to some of my colleagues. You're going to hear a bunch about our implementation of some of this with respect to privacy when you hear Tiffany talk later, and when you hear Pierre talk later about cartographer. I'm just saying that as a word to watch out for. They're going to talk about some of the details of our solution and how we incorporate some of what Ajit just talked about into the DMP. But I want to go to Rob and ask, so wonderful, we can sit down and we can construct household and individual IDs, whether those are deterministic or probabilistic. How does that impact the way you guys think about running ads, measuring them? What changes when you have individual IDs and household IDs?
Good question. I think what all of this comes down to, whether you're a marketer or even a publisher, is why do we market? Why do we monetize? It's because we're advertising some type of product. And so when we think about a household ID versus an individual ID versus a device ID, when to use all those, I think from an intelligence standpoint, you want all three. You want to be able to understand what the household composition is. You want to understand the individual, where they can log in and where you get that information back. And then you want to be able to tie all of those different device personas into a singular persona. From my perspective, it comes back to the product. When I want to move forward with more of a product that the whole house can enjoy, that's great for household targeting. When I want to move in with a promo for Father's Day, I probably don't necessarily want to target the father in the audience. He's the actual receiver of that promo. So household targeting can be beneficial. When I get into device level, it is actually nice to know, okay, what's a device that's being used for a lot of B2B type of stuff versus a device that's my mobile device that I'm on the go with at all times versus my tablet that I'm in much more of a lean back research type of mood for. And so all of those together, I think it's not that one is necessarily better for the other. It's not a zero-sum game for anyone. It's trying to blend your strategy with your tactics and understanding what is either your client looking for or what is the product that you're pushing out, and then exercising the right type of mix between all those.
Got you. Cool. Takeaways. I'm being prompted by Adam. So I'm going to give sort of my takeaway, and then if you guys want to give your takeaways, please go ahead. Essentially, the takeaway is that there have been huge changes to the underpinnings of ad tech in the past year. If you happen to have not thought about it until now, this is a great time to think about it. We're here to help you think about it and come up with a plan for how you address it. But if you have not thought about it, you really do need to. There's no way that things remain the way they were, just a couple years in the past.
I think on mine, what it really comes down to is just, it's a true set. The world that we live in, what a time to be alive. The problem is that everything that we're doing, I don't think it's really a technical issue of being able to tie everything together. It's a lot of different business issues. And so realize that if you're having trouble trying to tie everything together into a perfect bow, you're not alone with it. All of us marketers are faced with that, and we're adapting and we're creating kind of proxy models to accommodate for that. But I think the most important thing from my takeaway is to be a great marketer in this day and age, you need to plan like a strategist, and you need to kind of implement that plan as a tactician. And so it really comes down to having both your strategist and your tactician in a room, because what you want to do and what you can do is becoming more and more misaligned with the current ecosystem that we work within.
So as the next consultant, I cannot stop with just one bullet. I need to give 3 bullets. So the first bullet, I think we've kind of harped on this a bit, is identity is important. Has been important. The importance of it is increasing. The second bullet is identity is difficult. It's not, we talked about ID non-standardization. We talked about the colossal amount of data that's available. And none of that is stopping, right? So the amount of data that's coming in is increasing as well, which is making the problem more difficult to solve. And the third thing I would say is seek out now, instead of doing it yourself, like seek out partners, people in the industry who've kind of done this before, who've had the history of solving that particular problem, and work with them. Because again, going back to another thing that Andy said, what you get there is not only a good solution, but you also get a partner that's kind of trusted by the industry.
All right, thanks very much. And that concludes the session. Adam?